so much for that introduction. I'm going to dive right in. So, the Meschianza of 1778, orchestrated by Major John Andre as a celebration of General Howe preceding his return to England, was part regatta, part proto-Gothic tourney, and supper party and ball. The public of Philadelphia observed and participated in the event through publicly visible regatta, processions, and additions to the house and grounds at Walnut Grove. Elizabeth Drinker, a wealthy Quaker and diligent diarist married to a Philadelphia merchant, recalled these details specifically. Drinker observed the guests as they disembarked for the evening, remarking on the great number of officers and some women, and the house decorated in an expensive way, combined with the great display of fireworks as a mark of the day remembered by many from the scenes of folly and vanity. Her use of quantifying phrases such as remembered by many and it is said reflect the likelihood that her perception of the event was fed by others' first-hand observations, as well as stating how insensible do these people appear, while our land is so greatly desolated and death and sore destruction has overtaken and impends so many. The name Meschianza, meaning mixture in Italian, was intended to represent the combination of the different activities, pageantry, and settings of the event, as well as the sumptuous and varied visual and material aspects. Without a surviving physical location to which the memory of the Meschianza can be rooted, the memory of the event found continued tangible representation in texts and objects. As an ephemeral event lasting less than a full day from start to finish, scholars must approach the Meschianza through surviving records and objects. And pictured here is the ticket that Andre designed. The primary venue for the Meschianza was Walnut Grove, a Georgian country house built south of Philadelphia for Quaker merchant Joseph Wharton. Walnut Grove was the family's secondary residence, as they spent most of their time in their Philadelphia townhome. Wharton died in 1776 and left Walnut Grove to his son, Thomas Wharton. At the time of the Meschianza, the house was sitting unused and was likely selected for its convenient location on the Delaware River and the large open property on which it sat. This 1752 map shows the orientation of Walnut Grove relative to Philadelphia. And I've added, this is where we are here today at the Logan Hotel, approximately. Here's Walnut Grove, and then on this map, you can see that's Stenton, all the way up here. So just for a little bit of reference of a really far-flung country house and a slightly closer one. Walnut Grove, no longer extant, was a brick gentleman's house not dissimilar to other Philadelphia country houses such as Stenton. 19th century illustrations of the house show two outbuildings. There is little known about the interior of the house. The presence of a ballroom, likely located on the second floor, is mentioned in recollections of the Meschianza. The front of the house likely faced the Delaware River, and the house may have had its own dock and river entrance. A lavish regatta departing from Knight's Wharf in Philadelphia at 4 o'clock that afternoon carried the guests down the river to Walnut Grove, gathering crowds of spectators along the way. After landing and disembarking at Walnut Grove, somewhere this direction, the party entered an outdoor space for the tourney, pictured here. Seating described as amphitheaters were erected for the attendees. Some sources also indicate that sofas may have been arranged on the perimeter of the tourney ground for seating. Two triumphal arches had been erected on the grounds of the estate representing the Army and the Navy. I don't know which came first, Army or Navy, but one is here and one is here. The figure of Neptune sat atop the naval arch, bearing the motto, Laus illi debitur et amiae gratia major, praise is due to him and most gratitude from me, while the arch representing the army was topped with the allegory of fame and was inscribed with E bone quo virtus vocat, tua e pede fausto, go good man, whither your noble character calls you, go and good luck attend you. Both phrases clearly in support and praise of Howe. Fame was sculpted holding a trumpet, from which emerged a banner reading, Te lauriae font immortelle, your/his laurels are immortal. This design for an arch by Robert Adam is similar to the form of the Meschianza arches described in one source as having both wings and niches. The temporary pavilion erected at Walnut Grove for the Meschianza follows the courtly tradition of temporary structures erected for theatrical parties at country houses. A temporary pavilion was constructed using canvas and wood with high arched ceilings. The pavilion was reported as 120 feet long, and there was either a sconce or a mirror on each post of the pavilion. The walls were adorned with floral and fabric garlands and painted with pastoral scenes. Scholars of theater in the Age of Revolution, drawing from André's description in the Gentleman's Magazine, imagined the pavilion as similar to the temporary space designed and erected in wooden canvas by Robert Adam for the Fête Champêtre given by Lord Stanley at his English estate, the Oaks, in July 1774, illustrated here. The Meschianza was probably a little less grand than this, but you can kind of get a sense from the description of these swags of floral garlands and the general sort of classical implications of that maybe they were going for an Adamesque thing in the interior. The number of candles and the amount of light in the space was consistently mentioned in accounts and no doubt heightened an already fantastical sensory experience. In a report published on May 26, 1778 in the Royal Pennsylvania Gazette, a Loyalist Philadelphia newspaper, the writer states that the power of description is too languid to do justice to this singular entertainment in which British taste was only aided by British munificence. Many histories of the Meschianza record that mirrors and chandeliers were borrowed from Philadelphia's elite Loyalist families. One such mirror, pictured here, made its way through 19th century Philadelphia collections into the collection of the Library Company of Philadelphia. Additionally, a pair of mirrors still in situ at Cliveden, the country house of the Chew family, are said to have been used for the event. The account published in the Gentleman's Magazine describes 300 wax tapers on the supper tables and in the pavilion alone, in addition to 300 candles affixed to branches, likely sconces, and 18 chandeliers with 24 candles each. The same account also mentions 430 covers and 1,200 dishes. Covers likely refers to silver cloches or silver plate-covered dishes, a staggering display of wealth to the families who lent their possessions for the evening. The volume of candles, mirrors, and dishes had no match in Philadelphia at the time. The presence of these objects in such great numbers was an experience rarely seen out of palaces or great country estates, the grandeur of which dwarfed even the finest American homes. Frequent mention of the number of objects present suggests that reports of volumes of candles and silver would instantly convey to the reader the luxury and grandeur of the event. 1,200 dishes would have truly seemed an enormous amount, as even the grandest venues in the American colonies had only a fraction of that china and silver. The 1770 inventory taken of the governor's palace in Williamsburg, Virginia, after the unexpected death of Lord Bottetourt, lists specifically 27 dishes and 60 plates, among other china. The palace also only has 3 chandeliers, each with 6 branches, located in the ballroom. The presence of British objects was intended to visually assert British power to colonial viewers, as well as stand in as a physical manifestation of imperial pursuits. In the context of material comparison and seats of British taste and power in colonial America, the profusion of expensive objects within the Meschianza Pavilion was an amplified production of British imperial identity. The dazzling display of imperialist wealth and aesthetics extended the attire of people attending and working at the event. 24 enslaved people, one of whom is represented in André's illustration of a night of the Meschianza, were outfitted in Orientalist costumes consisting of blue and white turbans and sashes with silver bracelets and collars. The costume of the enslaved people directly recalls the figure of the luxury slave, frequently seen in English elite portraiture and aristocratic English practices of costuming and enslaved individuals, usually young boys, as exotic and Orientalist ornaments. In his account of the visual landscape of the event given to Peggy Chew, André placed enslaved people categorically with covers and dishes, underscoring their status as possessions that could be used to create the overall aesthetic program of the event. There was some appearance of enchantment upon entering the room when such a perspective of ornament and illumination caught the eye unexpectedly, when at the upper end were discovered 24 Negroes in blue and white turbans and sashes with bright bracelets and collars bowing profoundly together as the company journeyed through the prodigious length of the saloon. There is no distinction made in André's description between ornament and illumination and the physical presence of 24 enslaved people in the pavilion. They were simply another well-placed detail meant to catch and enchant the eye to him. The phrasing of his description itself lacks clarity in distinguishing human beings from mirrors, branches, and chandeliers. In a society where people were considered legal property and assigned monetary value like a mahogany high chest or silver platter, the grouping of enslaved people with inanimate objects and records of material possessions, such as probate inventories, would have been familiar to Peggy Chu and to contemporary readers of Andre's published report. The dress of the attendees of the Meschianza figures prominently in contemporary records of the event. The program of dress for the two camps of knights and their ladies were dictated by Andre himself and drew from specific stylistic influences. Andre and his officers serving as the knights wore costumes inspired by Henry IV of France. The use of historical military costume may have been intended to signal the refinement and chivalrousness of the British Army in contrast to the rather less flashy and often sartorially diverse Continental Army. The women were instructed to dress in a Turkish style, exemplified by turbans and sashes. The inscription accompanying the sketch provided by Jane Craig to Watson for his early 19th century manuscript states that Andre executed it to give the Meschianza ladies an idea of how they should dress as ladies of the Knights of the Blended Rose. While the style of the dress may have been dictated and the illustrated turban-style headdress specifically prescribed, there was significant opportunity for the women to have some degree of choice in their specific acts of material consumption as part of the overall event of the Meschianza. This aspect of choice and self-fashioning is key to understanding the impact of their dress within the fashion-centered culture wars of revolutionary Philadelphia. All of the dresses were specified as of the polonaise kind and of white silk with long sleeves, and the sashes, which were worn around the waist and were tied with a large bow on the left side, hung very low and were trimmed spangled and fringed according to the colors of the knight. Andre describes the style of gowns worn by the women as a polonaise, an immensely fashionable style in the 1770s. The polonaise is characterized by the skirt of the gown being drawn up by internal or external cords to drape over the petticoat. Andre also specifies long sleeves, a feature distinctly characteristic of the polonaise. The roots of the polonaise are ultimately Turkish in nature, distilled from the traditional kaftan, first through Poland and then France, although it is hardly recognizable by the time it reaches fashion plates. The fashion illustrations here show a more explicitly Orientalist garment and relative of the polonaise, the robe à la Turque. When garments that appear similar in construction to the polonaise or robe à la Turque appear in visual culture with clear Orientalist or Turquerie styling, it is most often in the case of ensembles like this one, which are explicitly costumes rather than fashionable dress. While the polonaise may have had Turkish roots, it was by no means the most on-theme garment Andre could have suggested for his guests. The robe à la Turque was not unknown in the American colonies. This 1771 portrait of Mrs. Thomas Gage by John Singleton Copley shows her dressed in a robe à la Turque. While some of Copley's subjects are painted in garments copied directly from mezzotints, the handling of the texture of the silk and details such as the small puckers in the fabric along the neckline, indicative of the texture resulting from a tiny prick stitch, indicate that this was probably a very real garment. The garment depicted here has very little formal difference from imagined classically inspired drapery often depicted in portraits such as this, and what truly separates it as a Turkish outfit from those of classical origin is the deployment of accessories such as the turban and the sash. A turban and sash appear to be in no means requisite to the wearing of a polonaise, but seem to be mandatory if the wearer desired a Turkish impression. However, the surviving material record of dress at the event seems to tell a different story. When acquiring their dress for the Meschianza, Philadelphia's elite women were actively and independently making consumer choices independent of Andre's vision. Surviving swatches of dresses worn to the Meschianza appear in 19th century antiquarian John Watson's Annals of Philadelphia manuscript. Watson also collected other swatches from 18th century Philadelphians' clothing in this same book. Watson does not record whose dresses these swatches came from, but their physical survival provides a valuable opportunity to parse out the complexities of women's dress at the Meschianza. Both swatches of fabric, carefully pasted into the pages of Watson's volume, are silk and are both woven floral patterns with a white ground. The lower two swatches appear to be from the same textile, most likely taken from two different parts of the same gown. The individual floral sprig seen in this swatch is a far different scale from the sprigs of the lower swatches, and the rendering of the flowers, berries, and leaves is less refined. If a sash and turban were all that was truly needed to fulfill the requirement for Turkish-style dress, the creation of these key accessories by a milliner would be a much quicker and less costly undertaking than the creation of a full gown. This upper swatch, which is a slightly heavier silk than the bottom ones, is specified to have come from the ruffle cuff of a gown. Wearing an already extant white polonaise with prescribed accessories was probably a far more financially sound decision than the purchase of an entirely new gown. Or perhaps something outdated could be deconstructed or altered. Watson records that this cuff, most likely from an older gown, measured 2 feet in circumference when ungathered. One edge of the swatch is trimmed with multicolored fly silk fringe. The trimmed edge has a slight curve, suggesting that this swatch came from a cuff that was shaped in the popular style of shorter in the front of the elbow and curving to longer behind. And so here you see that curved edge with the trim, and then that same part on a sleeve of an X dress in Winter's collection. From the swatch, it can be inferred that the whole design of the textile was likely a pattern of larger groupings of flowers scattered on an open ground, with several examples from the Winter collection shown here that date to this period. This style of silk is characteristic of an English design produced in the 1740s, marked by clear colors and floral designs in a medium scale. Silks of this type were readily available to and purchased by members of the Philadelphia elite. A silk of this quality would be valuable, the fabric representing a far greater investment of material wealth than the style of the gown. It would not be readily discarded as the fashions changed. Though only a small piece survives, a disparity between the likely date of the silk and the date of the Meschianza suggests that an older garment made of a textile out of fashion by 1778 may have been remade into a more current style of gown to fulfill the requirement for a white polonaise. If a new dress were to be made for the event, it would be a significant expense for a garment worn on just one occasion. A sensible but fashionable consumer would desire a gown that could be worn again. If the only guidance given regarding the gown itself, exclusive of accessories, was that it must be a white polonaise with long sleeves, even wealthy women would choose to create something they could wear again. The lower swatches are far more illustrative of contemporary silk designs in the 1770s. These designs are characterized often by vertical stripes, trompe-l'oeil elements such as flowers or wreaths with long scrolling stripes that resemble ribbons. Neoclassical influence is evident in these swatches, and they're much lighter and better suited to the more full and billowy designs like the polonaise. The 2 lower swatches, not dissimilar to these fabrics from the Winter collection, likely date from the 1770s and indicate either the purchase of a new material or the wearing of a currently fashionable garment. The difference between the 2 garments represented by the swatches in Watson illustrate what must have been a high level of diversity between the garments of individual female guests. A visual diversity of textiles and style implies to the viewer an element of choice in dress. The impression given by these ladies en masse would have been one of a display of fashion and taste rather than a parade of theatrical costumes or uniforms like the dress of the knights. The dress worn by the Meschianza ladies was not strictly uniform, and to treat it as such undermines the individual agency of women in the preparation of their dress for the event. The level of individual choice and political engagement through dress is apparent through analysis of the Watson swatches and Andre's drawings. Women attending the Meschianza were making active choices regarding their own self-fashioning through dress. Like the contents of the pavilion, they would have been legible to crowds of onlookers within local and broader cultures of consumption and display, and their personal choices could be assumed or inferred from their clothing. Observers seeking physical manifestation of political loyalties could easily cast the dress of female guests of the Meschianza as inherently English, and thus could be placed within the ongoing culture wars between loyalists and patriots in Philadelphia. Their specific styles of garments were absorbed into the public understanding of an aesthetic program prescribed by Andre in celebration and support of an English general and the British Empire. Wearing these clothes while championed by English officers, surrounded by objects representing English taste, power, and refinement, further cemented the connection in Philadelphia between objects, fashion, and loyalty during the Revolution. Thank you.